The concept of Sunnah in the Muwatta of Malik ibn Anas by Mohammed Yusuf Guraya, Mcgill University, 1969. Chapter 4, Al-Amr al-Mujtama'a alayhi andana, and the idea of consensus. Al-Amr al-Mujtama'a alayhi andana explained. Malik is the first known jurist to have used very extensively in his writings a term which seems to give the impression of consensus. The term is Al-Amr al-Mujtama' alayhi andana. When we open the Muwatta, we meet this term frequently in the chapters on social dealings and transactions. Despite this fact, however, the idea of general consensus of the whole community is not communicated by this term. Rather, it seems that the term suggests the local consensus of Medina. Nevertheless, there is evidence to establish the fact that Malik was aware of the general consensus of the community. Commenting on the validity of one witness and an oath, Malik criticizes the view of certain jurists from Kufa, Basra, Mecca, and Medina, and claims this is a matter on which all people and all regions have agreement. We, however, do not know precisely what he meant by the term al-amr al-mujtama'a alayhi. But this much is certain, that it did not include the whole Muslim community. The famous book by Al-Ghazali, Al-Mustasfa, has held that in the thought of Malik, this term means the consensus of Medina only. Muhammad Abu Zahra, another famous usuli, has inferred from Ghazali's statement that according to Malik, consensus is what is agreed upon only by the jurists of Medina, and nobody else enters into their circle. This matter becomes clear from the fact that whenever Malik advances the argument of consensus of the scholars on a certain issue, he says, that is the agreed practice amongst us. Abu Zahra explains this term in this way. If you read the Muwatta, you will find in a word indana, following the phrase al-amr al-mujtama' alayhi indana. Undoubtedly, this means the place, i.e. Medina. Zurqani, the chief commentator of the Muwatta, says in his commentary while explaining the term that indana meant in Medina. Professor Joseph Schatt, writing on the consensus of the Medinese, has pointed out one feature in which the Medinese idea of consensus differs from the Iraqis is that the Medinese restrict themselves to a local consensus, that is, only the authorities in Medina. Shafi'i has asserted that Malik had confined himself to the boundaries of Medina and talked of the consensus only as being the consensus of Medina. Al-Rabi', the pupil of Malik and Nadrasi of Ash-Shafi'i, in his polemics stated positively to Ash-Shafi'i that they, Malik and his followers, believed only in what the people of Medina had agreed upon, excluding the people of other regions. Following this line of thought, taking for granted that wherever the term al-amr al-mujtama' alayhi occurs in the Muwatta, it means consensus, the later Maliki scholars have distinguished between the consensus on the essentials of Islam and points out the details. Thus, according to them, the consensus of the whole Muslim community of Medina was related to issues such as the call for prayer and the call to follow the Imam, Iqama, and not to begin the prayer with a loud Bismillah, and on the instruments of scale and measurements such as the mud and the sa'a, i.e. measurements by using the hand. The consensus in the Muwatta on these essentials would be considered valid, and the consensus on points of detail would not be binding. Qadi Iyad is of this view. The majority of cases where Malik has used this term are related to the consensus of the scholars. Now, the point to be determined is whether the word indana means all the scholars of Medina or a group among them, to whom Malik also belonged. If the latter is the case, the question arises whether one particular group is always referred to, or whether the reference is indeterminate. This is a very difficult point to determine. The fact is, it is so difficult that a person like a Shafi'i, who was a direct pupil of Malik, could not resolve the problem. Shafi'i says, I wish I knew whose opinions they were that constitute consensus, of whom one hears nothing precisely, and whom we do not know. Allah help us. Allah has obliged no man to take his religion from quote-unquote private persons, whom he knows not. Even if Allah had done so, how would this justify taking one's religion from persons unknown? Stay tuned for many more parts.